My name is Lucas, and I'm 27 years old. I live in a cozy house in the suburbs of Los Angeles with my wife, Mary. We moved here 3 years ago, shortly after our wedding, thinking it would be the perfect place to start our life together. I work in finance, which keeps me busy with long hours and sometimes late nights. Mary, who's 23, has a job in public relations for a mid-sized firm. Despite our hectic schedules, we always made time for each other, or at least we used to. Lately, things have felt different. It's hard to pinpoint when it started, but Mary has been distant. She's always on her phone, smiling at texts she never shows me, and coming home later and later. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the stress of her new boss, Mark, who she mentioned was demanding and always pushing deadlines. But there was this nagging feeling I couldn't shake. One evening, Mary was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was one of those innocuous moments where I could have just let it be, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen. The name Mark flashed with a message preview that made my heart stop. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My stomach twisted into a knot. I knew I shouldn't, but I unlocked her phone and went through the messages. What I found was more than I ever could have imagined. There were photos, texts, and conversations that left no room for doubt. Mary was having an affair with her boss. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The room spun as I tried to process the betrayal. For the next few days, I was on autopilot, going through the motions at work, barely able to focus. Every time I looked at Mary, I saw those texts, those pictures. I couldn't bring myself to confront her yet. I needed to think, to plan my next move. So I rented a small apartment nearby, somewhere I could escape to and gather my thoughts. I didn't tell Mary my new address. It felt strange and deceptive, but I needed space to figure out what to do. 1 week passed before I could muster the courage to confront her. I suggested we meet at the beach, a neutral place where we often went to relax. As we walked along the shoreline, the sound of the waves crashing against the sand, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to lay everything out. "Mary, we need to talk," I began, my voice steady but my heart racing. She looked at me, confusion and worry in her eyes. "What's going on, Lucas?" "I know about you and Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "I saw the texts, the photos." Her face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "Lucas, I'm so sorry." "Why, Mary? How long has this been going on?" I asked, needing to hear the truth, even though it felt like it would crush me. Mary looked away, tears streaming down her cheeks. 3 months, she admitted. It started not long after he became my boss. I felt a surge of anger and hurt, but I kept my voice calm. "Did you bring him to our house?" asked, dreading the answer. She nodded slowly. "A few times, when you were away on business." My heart ached as I processed her words. The place we called home had been tainted by their betrayal. I needed to know one last thing. "Why, Mary? Was I not enough?" Mary shook her head, sobbing. "It wasn't like that. He manipulated me." I felt so lost and confused. The conversation hung heavy between us, the truth laid bare under the overcast sky. As much as I wanted to yell, to cry, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was the end of our chapter together, and it was time to move on. "Lucas," she said, breaking the silence, "there's something else. I'm pregnant. And it's Mark's." Her words echoed in my mind, each one a dagger piercing deeper into my heart. I turned away, unable to look at her. This was too much. I knew our marriage was over, and I had to find a way to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. The drive back to my new apartment was a blur. I parked and sat in the car, staring at nothing. I had recorded our conversation, knowing I would need it for the divorce. It felt cold and calculating, but I had to protect myself. In those moments alone, I realized that my life had just taken a turn I never expected. Betrayal, heartbreak, and the loss of trust had thrown me into a storm I wasn't prepared for. But somehow, deep down, I knew I would find a way through it. I had to. As I stepped into my new place, the small, unfamiliar space felt like both a prison and a sanctuary. It was my refuge, the first step toward rebuilding my life. And though the path ahead was uncertain, I knew I had to face it, one step at a time. The days following my conversation with Mary at the beach were a blur of confusion and emotional numbness. I moved into my small apartment, a stark contrast to the home we once shared. It was modest but enough for me to start over. I kept my new address a secret from Mary, needing the distance to figure things out. Threw myself into my work, using the familiar routines to drown out the chaos of my personal life. But every time I saw her name flash on my phone, I was reminded of the betrayal. Mary texted and called repeatedly, but I ignored her. The pain was still too raw. One evening, about a week after our beach meeting, Mary managed to get through on my phone. "Lucas, please," she pleaded over the line. "We need to talk." Sighed, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "All right," I replied. "Let's meet at the coffee shop near the pier tomorrow morning." The next morning, I arrived early, the salty ocean air mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. Chose a table outside, hoping the open space would keep things calm. Mary arrived a few minutes later, looking exhausted and anxious. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly together. "Lucas," she began, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant for it to get this far." I nodded, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "Mary, why didn't you tell me? Why did it have to come to this?" She looked down, tears brimming in her eyes. I was scared. Mark. He was so persuasive, and I felt trapped. I didn't know how to stop it. "Did you ever think about what this would do to us? To our marriage?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I did," she whispered, "but by then, I felt like I had no way out. He kept promising things would get better, that we'd figure it out, and I was so confused." Took a deep breath, trying to process her words. It was hard to see her like this, vulnerable and broken, yet it didn't erase the betrayal. "So what now, Mary?" I asked. "You're pregnant with his child. What do you plan to do?" She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I don't know, Lucas. I need help. I'm seeing a therapist to understand what happened and how to move forward. But I don't want to lose you." Shook my head slowly. "I can't stay in this marriage, Mary. The trust is gone. And with the baby, it's just too much." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'm so sorry." The conversation ended there, with both of us lost in our thoughts. I paid for our coffee and left, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It was the first step toward closing this chapter of my life. As the weeks passed, I focused on finding a new rhythm. Started waking up early to run. The cool morning air and the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement a welcome distraction. I hit the gym regularly, trying to channel my anger and frustration into something positive. Slowly, I began to feel a sense of control returning. At work, I threw myself into projects, staying late and pushing hard to keep my mind occupied. My colleagues noticed the change, but they didn't pry. It was a welcome reprieve to be able to lose myself in spreadsheets and financial reports, even if just for a few hours. One afternoon, during a rare break, my colleague David approached me in the break room. "Hey Lucas, how are you holding up?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I shrugged, taking a sip of my coffee. "It's been rough, but I'm managing, just trying to keep busy." David nodded. "If you ever need to talk, man, I'm here. Going through a divorce is no joke." "Thanks, David. I appreciate it," I replied, feeling a small flicker of gratitude. It was comforting to know that someone cared, even if they didn't know all the details. Meanwhile, Mary was living with her parents and continuing therapy. We communicated sparingly, mostly about practical matters related to the divorce. It was awkward and painful, but necessary. I knew I couldn't cut her out completely, especially with the baby on the way. One evening, after a particularly grueling workout, I found myself sitting on the floor of my apartment, exhausted but feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. I glanced at my phone and saw a text from Mary. "I'm really sorry for everything. I hope you're okay." I didn't respond right away, but her words stayed with me. It was clear she was struggling too, trying to navigate the mess we had both found ourselves in. For a moment, I felt a pang of empathy, but it didn't change the fact that our marriage was over. The divorce proceedings moved forward, each step bringing a mix of relief and sorrow. I recorded everything, kept meticulous notes, and stayed focused on protecting my future. It was painful to see our life together reduced to legal documents and court dates, but it was the only way to move on. Through it all, I began to understand that this experience, as devastating as it was, could be a turning point. I was learning to cope with pain, to rebuild my life, and to find strength in adversity. It wasn't easy, but each day, I felt a little more hopeful. As I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset over the city, I realized that I was starting to heal. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of optimism. I was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. After my talk with Mary at the coffee shop, I tried to keep pushing forward, but the weight of her betrayal lingered heavily. The reality of our impending divorce and the fact that she was carrying Mark's child made each day feel like a battle. Even the simple act of getting out of bed in the morning required more effort than I thought possible. Work became both a sanctuary and a curse. On one hand, it provided a distraction from the turmoil at home, but on the other, the long hours only intensified my feelings of loneliness and isolation. I began to question everything, my choices, my judgment, and my worth as a partner. One Friday evening, after a particularly grueling week, I found myself alone in my apartment, staring at a bottle of whiskey. I had never been much of a drinker, but that night, I was looking for a way to numb the pain. As the liquid burned its way down my throat, I felt a temporary relief, a dulling of the constant ache in my chest. Hours later, I was sprawled on the couch, the bottle nearly empty and the room spinning around me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, and through blurry eyes, saw Mary's name on the screen. Despite everything, I still picked up. "Lucas." Her voice was soft and tentative, as if she was afraid of what she might find on the other end. "What do you want, Mary?" I slurred, my words thick with alcohol. "I just wanted to check on you. You haven't been responding to my texts," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. There was a long pause. "Lucas, I know you're hurting, and I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do." I cut her off, anger rising. "You've done enough, Mary. Just leave me alone." I hung up, tossing the phone aside. The conversation had stirred up all the emotions I was trying so hard to suppress. I felt lost, betrayed, and utterly alone. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a deep sense of shame. The apartment was a mess, and I could barely remember the details of the previous night. As I cleaned up, I knew I couldn't keep going down this path. Drinking wasn't the answer, and it wouldn't help me heal. I decided to reach out to David. He'd been a good friend through this ordeal, offering support without prying too much. We met at a local diner for breakfast, a familiar and comforting setting. David sat across from me, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a look of concern. "You look like hell, man," he said, his voice filled with empathy. I shrugged. "It's been rough. I haven't been handling things well." He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I get it. Divorce is brutal, but you've got to take care of yourself." "I know," I replied, staring down at my plate. "I just don't know how to move past this. Everything feels so broken." David leaned in, his tone serious. "Lucas, you're stronger than you think. Look at everything you've done so far, moving out, starting to work out, facing the truth. It's not easy, but you're doing it." I sighed, appreciating his words but still feeling the weight of my struggles. "I'm trying. It's just hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel right now." He nodded again, offering a small smile. "It will get better, I promise. Just take it one day at a time." Our conversation gave me a small glimmer of hope. I realized I needed to face my feelings head-on instead of trying to drown them in alcohol. It was time to take control and find a way through this mess. I started to focus more on my health, not just physically but mentally as well. I began meditating in the mornings, just for a few minutes, to help clear my mind and set a positive tone for the day. I also reached out to a therapist, hoping to find a better way to navigate the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Mary and I continued to exchange texts, mostly about logistical issues regarding the divorce. Each message was a painful reminder of what we had lost, but I tried to keep our interactions civil and brief. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. It was Mary. Hesitated before answering, unsure if I was ready for another conversation. "Lucas, I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice serious but calm. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. "It's about the baby. I've decided to raise it on my own. Mark and we're not together anymore," she explained, her tone filled with a mix of determination and sadness. I was stunned. "You're going to do this alone?" she sighed. "I think it's the best choice for me and the baby. Mark isn't who I thought he was, and I need to focus on being a good mother." Took a deep breath, absorbing her words. "Mary, that's a huge decision. Are you sure you're ready for this?" She paused, then replied, "I'm scared, but I think it's the right thing to do. I want to make amends for my mistakes and start fresh." Her decision made me see her in a new light. Despite the pain and betrayal, I could respect her for taking responsibility and trying to move forward in a positive direction. "Okay," I said finally. "I hope it works out for you, Mary. I really do." "Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot," she replied softly before we ended the call. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Mary's decision to go it alone made our separation feel more final, but it also gave me a sense of closure. I knew we were both trying to find our way forward, even if it was on separate paths. In the weeks that followed, I continued to focus on rebuilding my life. The workouts, therapy, and meditation helped me slowly regain a sense of balance. Reconnected with old friends and began to enjoy small moments of happiness again, whether it was a good run in the park or a quiet evening with a book. The conflict with Mary had pushed me to the brink, but it also showed me a strength I didn't know I had. I was learning to cope with the pain and finding ways to move beyond it. It was a slow process, but each day brought a little more hope and a little less hurt. As I stood on my balcony one evening, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I felt a quiet resolve growing within me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days blurred into weeks as I tried to navigate my new reality. I was adjusting to life on my own, but the emotional weight of the past months lingered. Mary's decision to raise the baby alone had closed a chapter, but the residue of our broken relationship was hard to shake off. To keep myself from spiraling, I threw myself into a routine. Each morning began with a run through the neighborhood, a quiet suburb just outside downtown Los Angeles. It was a stark contrast to the life Mary and I had planned together in the bustling heart of the city. The rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement became a kind of therapy, a way to clear my mind and start the day with a semblance of control. Work had also become a focal point. In finance, there's no room for distraction, and the intense pace at the office kept me from dwelling too much on my personal life. Still, there were moments, like when I passed by the coffee shop where Mary and I used to meet for lunch, that brought back a flood of memories. One Thursday afternoon, I got a call from David, my closest friend and confidant through this whole ordeal. "Hey, Lucas, how about grabbing a drink tonight?" David suggested. "I know a great place downtown, and you could use a break." I hesitated, thinking of the whiskey-induced fog I had been trying to avoid. But David wasn't suggesting a binge, just a chance to unwind. "Sure, why not?" I replied. I could use some company. Later that evening, we met at a cozy bar with dim lighting and a laid-back vibe. David was already at a corner table, nursing a beer. "Glad you made it," he said, smiling as he handed me a menu. "Thanks for the invite," I replied, taking a seat. I needed this. As we sipped our drinks, the conversation flowed from work to sports to the latest Netflix shows. It was a relief to talk about something other than my crumbling marriage. But eventually, the topic circled back to the inevitable. "How's everything with Mary?" David asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. "It's complicated. We're handling the logistics of the divorce, but it's still hard to process everything. She's going to therapy and focusing on the baby." David nodded. "And how are you holding up?" "I'm trying to move forward," I said, my voice a mix of resignation and determination. "I'm seeing a therapist too. It's helping, but there's still a lot to work through." David looked thoughtful. "It's good that you're taking steps to heal. It's a process, man. Just take it one day at a time." His words resonated with me. I had been so focused on the end goal, getting over Mary and moving on, that I hadn't really allowed myself to just be in the moment, to acknowledge the pain and let it pass in its own time. As the evening wore on, I realized how important it was to have friends like David, who could offer support without judgment. It was a small but significant reminder that I wasn't completely alone in this journey. The next day, I had a therapy session. My therapist, Dr. Collins, was a calm, reassuring presence who had been helping me unpack the layers of my emotions. We had been working together for a few weeks now, and I was starting to feel more at ease in our sessions. "So, How have you been coping since our last meeting? Dr. Collins asked, her voice gentle but probing. I thought for a moment before replying. It's been a mix. I've been keeping busy with work and trying to stay active. I went out with a friend last night, which helped, but there are still moments when everything feels overwhelming. Dr. Collins nodded. That's perfectly normal. It's important to give yourself permission to feel whatever comes up, without judging those emotions. Healing isn't linear. It's a journey with ups and downs. I sighed. I know, but it's hard to let go of the anger and sadness. I thought Mary and I had a solid relationship. I trusted her. That trust was betrayed, and it's natural to feel hurt, she replied. What's crucial is how you channel those feelings. It's good that you're staying active and connected with friends. Have you considered any other outlets for your emotions? I pondered her question. I've been thinking about journaling or maybe trying out a new hobby, something to keep my mind occupied. Those are great ideas, Dr. Collins encouraged. Exploring new activities can be very therapeutic. It's about finding what works for you and helps you process your experiences. Her words gave me a lot to think about. I left the session feeling a little lighter, with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, I picked up a journal and started writing. It was awkward at first, putting my thoughts down on paper, but it soon became a release, a way to untangle the emotions that swirled within me. In the following weeks, found myself growing more comfortable in my new routine. I even tried out a cooking class, something Mary and I had always talked about doing together, but never did. It was a small step, but it felt empowering to pursue something on my own, to reclaim a bit of myself that had been lost in the chaos. One weekend, I ran into Mary at the grocery store. It was the first time we'd seen each other since our talk about the baby. There was an awkward moment of silence as we stood there in the produce aisle, unsure of how to begin. "Hi, Lucas," Mary said finally, her voice soft. "Hey, Mary," I replied, managing a small smile. "How have you been?" "I've been okay," she said, her hand unconsciously resting on her growing belly. "It's been challenging, but I'm getting through it. Therapy has been helping." "That's good to hear," I said, genuinely relieved that she was finding some support. "I've been seeing someone too. It's been helping me sort things out." We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation awkward but civil. As we parted ways, I realized that while the wounds were still fresh, there was a sense of mutual understanding. We were both trying to move forward in our own ways, learning to navigate a new normal. Life was still far from perfect, but I was starting to find a semblance of balance. Each day brought its own challenges, but I was learning to face them with a bit more resilience and grace. The relationship with Mary was changing, evolving from what it had been to something different, something that still held a place in my life, but no longer defined it. As I continued to build my new life, I held on to the hope that one day the scars would fade, and I would emerge stronger, more whole, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. After the lawyer's office door clicked shut behind me, I paused to take a deep breath. The finality of the moment weighed heavily, but there was also an unexpected lightness. I was officially divorced, no longer tethered to the chaos of my past with Mary. I walked to my car, feeling a mix of liberation and uncertainty. The next few days passed in a blur. My apartment, once a shared space, now felt empty and unfamiliar. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, my mind running through endless loops of what-ifs and if-onlys. One night, as I lay awake in the darkness, a thought struck me. I needed to rebuild, not just my life, but myself. I decided to take up running. At first, it was torturous. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, and every step felt like a battle. But with each run, I pushed a little further, and gradually, it became my therapy. The rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement matched the beat of my heart, and the wind against my face felt like a cleansing force, washing away layers of old pain. Mornings were now dedicated to running. The neighborhood, which I had previously ignored, came alive. The sunrise over the park, the friendly nods from fellow early risers, and the simple satisfaction of completing another mile were new sources of solace. It wasn't just about the physical benefits. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant for too long. In the quiet evenings, I turned to reading. Books had always been a part of my life, but now they became my escape and my guide. I devoured stories of people who had faced their own challenges and emerged stronger. Fictional heroes and real-life survivors alike inspired me to keep moving forward. Reading gave me a sense of connection and purpose, reminding me that even in my solitude, I was not alone. One day, as I flipped through the pages of a self-help book, I stumbled upon a section about habits. It was a revelation. I had been numbing my pain with junk food, alcohol, and endless hours of mindless scrolling on my phone. It was time for a change. I quit drinking cold turkey. The first few days were rough. I missed the numbing comfort of a beer after work, but as the weeks passed, began to notice the clarity returning to my mind. My sleep improved, and the fog that had hung over me for so long started to lift. Next, I tackled my diet. I swapped greasy takeout for fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains. It was a struggle at first, but soon I found joy in cooking simple, healthy meals. Each dish was a small victory, a tangible sign of my commitment to a better life. My energy levels soared, and I felt more in control of my body and my future. It wasn't just my physical health that improved. The act of caring for myself, of making choices that supported my well-being, began to heal my emotional wounds. I started to appreciate the quiet moments alone in my kitchen, the satisfaction of creating something nourishing with my own hands. As the weeks turned into months, I found a new rhythm. Running in the mornings, working during the day, and reading or cooking in the evenings became my routine. My home, once a reminder of what I had lost, transformed into a sanctuary, a place where I could be alone without feeling lonely. Began to notice the small joys in life, the crisp morning air during my runs, the smell of a new book, the taste of a well-prepared meal. These simple pleasures became the foundation of my new existence. One afternoon, while I was reading on my balcony, I looked up to see a butterfly fluttering around the flowers I had recently planted. It danced on the breeze, a symbol of transformation. I smiled, realizing that, like the butterfly, I was undergoing my own metamorphosis. Reflecting on the past year, I saw how far I had come. The pain and betrayal that had once consumed me were no longer the defining features of my life. They were scars, yes, but scars that showed I had survived and grown. In the quiet of my apartment, I found strength in my solitude. I discovered that being alone didn't mean being lonely. It meant having the space to explore, to heal, and to rebuild on my own terms. As the sun set on another day, I felt a deep sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, but I was ready to face it. I had learned to stand on my own, to embrace my independence, and to find joy in the journey of becoming who I was meant to be. If you found the story interesting, please subscribe to the channel, press the bell, and don't forget to give us a like. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.